So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Conor Fennelly. I'm CEO at Leveris. And yeah, so basically, what are we? This is what we offer is a full-service tech stack if you want to deliver a digital bank. So essentially, it is as close as you would ever get to a digital bank in a box. The topic of discussion here today, actually, that we wanted to address in the brief 10 minutes that we have is to address CEOs out there who are thinking of modernizing their banks. So we'd like to talk about, first of all, what the problem is, so everybody understands that clearly. Secondly, what are the options and solutions? And thirdly, how a company like ours might actually help. So the problem with core banking today actually is this diagram that you see. It's a big pile of spaghetti. And if you look at if you characterize the way banks are built, every single bank on the planet, all 40,000 retail banks that we know about, are built something like this. This is a grossly simplified version of the spaghetti at any bank, actually. What you have is an old and aging core, onto which, over a period of time, you've layered multiple layers of complexity, various subsystems and componentry, et cetera, et cetera. So what you get over time is a system that's increasingly difficult to maintain and an accumulation of technical debt. So any changes you want to make, it's no surprise, actually, when you look at banks, why they can't actually be efficient, because on the back end, if you look at that, how would you ever expect to be cost-efficient operating a system that looks like that? And the very same reason transfers to the front. How could you ever expect to deliver an intuitive customer interface when all you can do basically is, all your effort is around keeping this thing alive? So basically, the conclusion that we've reached is that it's not so much that that banks are failing their customers, so much it is that guys like us, actually technologists, are failing to provide the technology that bankers actually need. So we actually believe, our thesis is that all of the problems facing banks today can be addressed almost entirely via technology. So if we look at the marketplace, I think this is very telling. There are about 40,000 retail banks globally, 80% of whom, so that's about 30,000 banks, are actively engaged in some sort of transformation program. But only about 0.004%, so only about 150 of those guys are actually conducting a transformation. So why is that? So why are there so many actively engaged in considering it and so few doing it? And the reason for that is because the solutions that are offered, this huge discrepancy can be explained by the solutions that are available to banks today. There are two main ways of solving the problem today. One of them is elective open heart surgery, whereby you take your old core, you rip it out, and you replace it with a new beating heart, essentially. And the other approach, which is far more prevalent, is a form of cosmetic surgery. And I'll just go and explain those a little bit more. So essentially, when you do a heart transplant or a core-to-core replacement, what you're looking at is taking one legacy system, an older one, and replacing it with a newer version. The reason why you can't update the old one is the original core you had, once you pasted a whole bunch of Scotch tape and superglued a whole bunch of stuff to it, you can't update it without breaking everything else. When you engage in something like this, what happens? You actually have to create the new system. You pay a massive license for that, sometimes in the hundreds of millions. And then you've got to migrate all of your data, all of your subsystems, all of your legal agreements across. Now, this turns out to be a very, very difficult thing to do. And in fact, in 2 cases out of 3, so 66% of the time, this endeavor fails. So it's no surprise then that a lot of banks actually don't opt for this approach. They opt for something else. And the second approach is something that looks like this. What they do is they take the entire legacy environment they have, and a typical legacy environment for a normal retail bank, Tier 1, would have anywhere between, let's say, 500 and 1,000 subsystems. They'll abstract the data from all of those subsystems up to what's called an ODS layer, which is an operational data store layer. And on top of that, they'll create a veneer, additional functionality. They'll create a very nice user interface. But they're very cognizant of the fact that none of the underpinning economics will be altered. You won't be able to modernize your bank. You won't be able to change the efficiencies. Your cost-income ratios are not going to change. So what we're really saying is that if you follow the medical analogy, there is really a third option. It's not very common. No one has really seen it today, but there is a third option, and it's kind of what we offer. It's kind of like more like gene therapy. And the reason we say it's more like gene therapy is because it involves a fundamental alteration of the underpinning DNA of how you create a bank. So this is a legacy bank. Typically, this type of architecture is out 30 years old. What we build out on is what's called a services-oriented architecture. None of this stuff is new. All tech companies in the world are using an architecture like this on the right. So it's proven. But the attributes of said architecture type are interesting. So, for example, the entry cost is a lot lower, licensing fees are a lot lower, so the initial CapEx outlay is a lot lower. But much more fundamentally, the cost-income ratios of a bank dramatically decrease. A very efficient bank running on a legacy system today will be operating at cost-income ratios in the mid-60s. On a services-oriented architecture type infrastructure, you're going to run in the high 20s or low 30s. So that's a dramatic increase in efficiency. But added to that, you've also got a whole bunch of other benefits. For example, this infrastructure, no matter how many customers you have, or no matter what additional functionality you add, the infrastructure does not get more complex. So it's highly modular. So you can add new functionality easily, you can take it away easily, you can connect with third parties easily, and you can maintain compliance much easier, because you're not going into a monolithic environment to do so. The other important point that I'd like to make here is that when you do a legacy-to-legacy transformation, it's not a CEO decision at all. It's the CEO has to defer to his CIO or CTO. It's a technical decision. With what we propose, which is a fundamental architecture change, it becomes entirely a business decision. So if you accept that moving from an old architecture to a new architecture can help your bank, the next question would be, how would you do that? So this is how we would propose you do it. So basically, this is how a bank is set up today. You've got a mothership, and you've got a bunch of branches, and end of day, these branches roll up end of day into the accounting system. All of the compliance, treasury, capital adequacy, et cetera, is handled at the mothership. What we would suggest is as follows, and this is exactly what we're designed to do. So we have Leveris. It's a fully independent bank. It functions without reference or need to connect to anything, in fact. But what we do is we connect to the old bank as a branch. As branch number 101 or 1001, we connect just like a branch. So we go in through the same APIs. We report in end of day. In fact, our system is real time, but we emulate end of day reporting so we can connect to the bank at a balance sheet level. What that allows a bank to do is any additional functionality you want to put on your platform, you don't have to build it in the legacy platform. You can build it out on your new architecture. But the key thing here is if you dock this system in as a branch rather than trying to replace it, you remove the risk. So basically what happens is over time, progressively, depending on how you're organized, depending on the structure of the bank, you move your functionality and your customers over piece by piece. So over time, what's at the old bank, the functionality of the old bank decreases and the functionality in your new infrastructure will increase over time. The end of the day, this takes a long time apparently. At the end of the day, what you end up with is a choice. You've got a non-tactical, completely strategic option set in front of you. You can decide which customers at old bank you want to maintain, which ones you want to age down, which ones you want to age out, and which ones you want to migrate over. But at the end of the day, so 3 years or 5 years or 7 years hence, however long it takes you, you end up with an entirely new modern architecture at a bank. So that's essentially what Leveris is, and that's how we would propose you use it. Thank you.